Gossip does not survive on facts, it survives on reaction. Most people think the way to stop gossip is to explain more, defend louder, or confront aggressively. But the truth is uncomfortable. The more emotional energy you pour into gossip, the longer it lives. Gossip spreads because it creates stimulation. It gives people something to react to, something to discuss, something to feel superior about. And when you respond with visible frustration, panic, or over-explanation, you unintentionally confirm that the story has power. Power keeps it circulating. Imagine this: someone tells you, "I heard people are saying you mishandled that situation." Your heart rate rises. You start rehearsing defenses. You message multiple people to clarify your version. You confront the suspected source. You vent emotionally. Within hours, more people are talking not just about the original rumor, but about your reaction. Now the story has two layers, and gossip thrives on layers. The Stoics understood something most people ignore: you cannot fully control what others say about you, but you can control how much energy you feed into what they say. Marcus Aurelius wrote about reputation as something outside of your direct control. Character is yours, narrative is not. When you obsess over narrative, you lose focus on behavior. When you lose focus on behavior, you lose the only thing that stabilizes perception over time. Here's the psychological reality: gossip that produces no reaction weakens quickly. Gossip that produces emotional chaos strengthens. Most people amplify the very thing they want to eliminate. In this video, we're not going to talk about revenge. We're not going to talk about exposing people or fighting back publicly. We're going to talk about quiet actions, controlled, disciplined shifts that remove oxygen from gossip fast. Because gossip needs attention, and attention is something you can regulate. Let's break down the 6 actions that end it without drama. Before we get into the specific actions, you need the right mindset. Because if your goal is to control what everyone thinks about you, you will exhaust yourself. There is a difference between reputation and character. Reputation is external. It lives in other people's minds. It shifts. It mutates. It depends on incomplete information and emotional bias. You can influence it, but you cannot own it. Character is internal. It lives in your decisions, your consistency, your behavior under pressure. It does not fluctuate based on whispers. The Stoics were clear about this distinction. They focused relentlessly on character because reputation was never fully in their control. If someone misunderstood them, they corrected it calmly when appropriate, but they did not chase approval. Most people reverse this. They obsess over reputation and neglect behavior. When gossip appears, panic begins. What are people thinking? How many heard it? Who started it? The mind spirals into narrative management. But narrative management is reactive. Behavior control is proactive. If you focus on behaving consistently and professionally while gossip circulates, you begin to create contrast. The rumor says one thing, your actions show another. Over time, people trust what they see more than what they hear. This does not happen overnight, but it happens faster than emotional firefighting. Here's the key shift. You do not need to correct every person. You do not need to clear your name in every room. You need to stabilize your conduct. When you are visibly composed, productive, and steady, while rumors float around, something subtle happens. Observers begin questioning the rumor on their own, because gossip without visible evidence weakens. The mistake is thinking you must defend constantly to protect your image. Over-defending signals insecurity. Calm consistency signals confidence. The goal is not to control the story. The goal is to control your behavior so thoroughly that the story loses credibility. That is the Stoic leverage. Now let's move into the first action, the one that stops most gossip from spreading further. Action number 1. Stop defending yourself to everyone. This is the most common mistake people make when they hear gossip about themselves. They go into reputation repair mode. They start explaining their side to anyone who will listen. They try to get ahead of the narrative. They send messages. They clarify details. They overshare context. It feels productive. It is not. When you defend yourself repeatedly, two things happen. First, you unintentionally validate the rumor's importance. If you are running around correcting it, observers assume there must be something serious behind it. Urgency signals threat. Second, you expand the audience. People who had never heard the gossip now hear your explanation of it. Now the rumor spreads through you. The Stoic approach is restraint. You do not deny facts if directly confronted, but you do not proactively campaign for approval either. If someone approaches you calmly and says, "I heard something about you, is it true?" you respond directly and briefly, "That's not accurate. There's more context to that situation. I'm comfortable with how I handled it." Then you move on. No dramatic storytelling, no emotional venting, no character assassination of the source. The less energy you inject, the less oxygen the rumor receives. There is also a psychological principle here. People watch your emotional temperature. If you appear unbothered and grounded, many will interpret that as innocence or confidence. If you appear frantic, they sense instability. Calm communicates credibility. Over-defending communicates insecurity. This does not mean you stay silent in situations that require formal clarification, especially in professional settings where stakes are high. But outside of necessary channels, resist the urge to explain yourself to every curious listener. You do not owe everyone your version. Your behavior over time will speak louder than your explanations in the moment. When you stop defending yourself everywhere, gossip loses amplification, and without amplification, it starts to shrink. Action number 2, respond directly, once calmly. There is a difference between defending yourself everywhere and addressing something strategically one time. If gossip is circulating in a professional or social circle where silence could be misinterpreted as agreement, a single controlled clarification can stop momentum early. The mistake is overreacting. The effective move is simple, contained, and unemotional. If you discover who is spreading it and the environment allows a calm conversation, you address it privately. "I've heard that this is being said. It's not accurate. If there's a concern, I'm open to discussing it directly." That's it. No attack, no accusation, no dramatic tone, just clarity. When delivered without visible anger, this does two important things. First, it signals confidence. You are not hiding, you are not panicking, you are not performing outrage, you are simply stating your position. Second, it removes ambiguity. Gossip thrives in indirect spaces. When you bring it into direct conversation, it becomes less entertaining and more uncomfortable. Many gossip carriers prefer distance. They prefer whispers, not eye contact. When confronted calmly without hostility, the behavior often weakens because the emotional reward disappears. In professional settings, this can also be done publicly, in a controlled way, if needed. For example, if a rumor is influencing a team dynamic, you might say in a meeting, "There seems to be some confusion about that situation. Here's what actually happened." Neutral tone, clear explanation, no blame. Then you return to the agenda. The Stoic principle here is proportional response. You do not escalate beyond what is necessary. You do not suppress to the point of passivity. You address once with discipline. After that, you stop repeating yourself. Repetition signals insecurity. Single clarification signals authority. When people see that you handled it directly and calmly, many will adjust their perception immediately. Gossip feeds on chaos. Clarity starves it. And clarity delivered once is stronger than emotional repetition delivered 10 times. Action number 3, increase visible consistency in your behavior. This is the midpoint shift. Once gossip exists, your reputation is no longer shaped by words. It is shaped by contrast. The rumor says one thing, your actions say another. Whichever signal repeats more consistently wins. Most people panic and start acting differently when they know they're being talked about. They become guarded, defensive, slightly tense, overly careful, or sometimes overly performative. That shift is noticeable, and noticeable shifts can accidentally reinforce suspicion. The stronger move is radical consistency. If the rumor claims you are unreliable, your punctuality becomes precise. If it claims you are difficult, your communication becomes measured and professional. If it claims you are dishonest, your transparency becomes clear and documented. Not dramatically, not aggressively, just consistently. The Stoics believed in alignment between identity and action. They did not argue character, they demonstrated it. Over time, consistency dissolves distortion. Here is why this works psychologically. Observers trust patterns over stories. One dramatic rumor cannot compete with weeks of observable stability. When people see no evidence supporting the gossip, cognitive dissonance begins. The narrative feels misaligned with reality, and humans instinctively trust direct experience over hearsay. Consistency also protects your internal state. When you continue operating normally, instead of adjusting to rumors, you signal to yourself that your behavior is grounded in principle, not perception. That internal confidence leaks externally. This does not mean you perform perfection. It means you remove volatility. No sudden emotional swings, no erratic reactions, no visible insecurity, just steady behavior. Over time, gossip loses momentum because there is no reinforcement. The story says one thing, reality says another, and reality, when consistent, always wins. Action number 4, control your emotional leakage. When gossip circulates, the biggest risk is not the rumor itself, it's your visible reaction to it. People watch closely when they know you're aware of something being said. They scan your face for irritation, they listen for bitterness in your tone, they observe whether your behavior changes around certain individuals. If they see emotional disturbance, the rumor gains weight, even if it's false. Emotional leakage looks like this: short responses that carry hidden tension, subtle sarcasm, overly cold behavior towards specific people, passive-aggressive comments disguised as jokes, sudden withdrawal from environments where you used to be comfortable. These signals create curiosity. Curiosity keeps gossip alive. The Stoic approach is emotional containment, not suppression. Containment. You acknowledge internally that the situation is uncomfortable, but externally your demeanor remains steady. Same tone, same pace, same professionalism. If someone mentions the rumor casually, your reaction remains measured. No eye roll, no visible frustration, no exaggerated dismissal. The less emotional fluctuation you display, the less reinforcement observers receive. There's also a deeper dynamic at play. Gossip often aims to destabilize. It attempts to trigger insecurity, anger, or defensiveness. If none of those appear, the psychological payoff disappears. When people realize their whisper campaign produces no visible shift in you, it becomes less interesting. Emotional neutrality reduces spectacle, and gossip needs spectacle. This does not mean you ignore genuine hurt. It means you process it privately with trusted individuals, not publicly in environments where it can be misinterpreted. Your nervous system should not become public entertainment. Regulate first, respond second. Over time, emotional containment creates a new perception stability. And stability quietly discredits rumors that rely on drama to survive. Action number 5. Create strategic distance from gossip carriers. Not dramatic distance, not confrontational distance, strategic distance. Once you identify individuals who consistently spread or amplify rumors, the mistake is engaging them emotionally or trying to win them over. Gossip carriers often thrive on access. The closer they are to you, the more material they can distort. Access is leverage. When you reduce access, you reduce opportunity. This might look like limiting casual conversations, keeping communications strictly professional, avoiding oversharing personal details, declining invitations that place you in unstructured environments where narratives can form. You remain polite, you remain composed, but you become less available. The Stoic principle here is selective exposure. You cannot fully control other people's behavior, but you can control proximity. If someone has demonstrated a pattern of misrepresenting information, it is rational, not reactive, to reduce their access to your life. Strategic distance does not require announcements. You do not say, "I'm cutting you off." You simply shift your behavior. Shorter conversations, neutral tone, fewer personal disclosures. Over time, the flow of new material decreases. Gossip weakens when it has nothing fresh to feed on. There is also a reputational benefit. When observers see you maintaining professionalism while quietly stepping back, they interpret it as maturity rather than hostility. You are not escalating, you are adjusting. Distance also protects your internal state. Constant exposure to people who distort narratives creates unnecessary tension. When that exposure decreases, your nervous system stabilizes. And when your nervous system stabilizes, your presence becomes more grounded, which further undermines the rumor. Strategic distance is not avoidance, it is boundary management. And boundary management shortens the lifespan of gossip dramatically. Action number 6. Raise your value, so gossip loses oxygen. This is the long-term accelerator. Gossip sticks most easily to people whose perceived value is neutral or undefined. When someone is clearly competent, clearly productive, clearly respected for tangible contributions, rumors struggle to gain traction. Why? Because people weigh cost. If believing the gossip means losing access to someone valuable, many will hesitate. So instead of obsessing over clearing your name, shift your focus toward increasing visible contribution. In a professional environment, that means delivering results, meeting deadlines, communicating clearly, supporting team outcomes, making your work speak louder than whispers. In social settings, that means maintaining integrity, being reliable, showing up consistently, being the person whose behavior aligns with their words. Value creates insulation. The Stoics emphasized excellence in conduct over concern with opinion. When you invest energy into improving your craft, your discipline, your reliability, something powerful happens. The narrative becomes secondary. People begin associating you with performance, not rumor. There is also a psychological effect here. Gossip thrives in emotional environments. When you shift the focus back to measurable contribution, the emotional drama loses center stage. Observers start asking different questions. Is that rumor even relevant? Does it match what I see? Why would I jeopardize a strong working relationship over hearsay? The higher your perceived utility and integrity, the less attractive gossip becomes. This is not manipulation. It is positioning. You are not trying to outshine the rumor with ego. You are outgrowing it with substance. Over time, the story fades because attention moves to your output. And output is harder to argue with than emotion. Raise your value quietly. Let your consistency and competence create gravity. Gossip struggles to survive around people whose actions are too solid to distort. Here is the elevated truth. Gossip does not end because you win an argument. It ends because it stops producing energy. You stopped defending yourself to everyone. You clarified once calmly. You increased visible consistency. You controlled emotional leakage. You created strategic distance. You raised your value. None of these moves were loud. None required revenge. None required public humiliation. They required discipline. The Stoics understood something most people ignore. Your peace is more valuable than your image. If you sacrifice emotional stability trying to control every whisper, you lose twice your equilibrium and your reputation. But when you remain steady, something shifts. Observers begin to notice the contrast. The rumor feels loud. You feel calm. The rumor feels unstable. You feel consistent. The rumor feels dramatic. You feel measured. Humans trust patterns over noise, and patterns require time. There will be moments when you want to react, moments when your ego demands immediate correction. That is the internal battle. Win that battle first, because the person who can remain composed under narrative pressure becomes psychologically untouchable. Over time, gossip loses momentum. For a simple reason, it stops being interesting. There is no visible chaos, no emotional unraveling, no public spectacle. Without spectacle, attention fades, and without attention, gossip dies. If this resonated, write this in the comments. My stability speaks louder than rumors, Because in the long game of reputation, calm consistency always outlasts temporary noise. And the strongest response to whispers is quiet strength.